It started with a letter. A fine for flying a flag on my own lawn. They thought I'd roll over. But instead, I rolled in something else. So when they said, "You can't park that here," I smiled and told them, "You wanted rules? Here's a tank." The morning air still carried that early chill that bit the fingertip. Steam curled from my mug, catching the faint orange light creeping over the rooftop. I just settled into the porch chair when a low hum disturbed the quiet, a sound too heavy for this kind of morning. A white SUV rolled into the cul-de-sac like it owned the place. Chrome polished, windows tinted, the kind of clean that said, "official," even when it wasn't. It stopped in front of my yard, right where the flagpole stood. The pole wasn't much. 4 feet of aluminum anchored in stone, with a small American flag that had seen more dawns than most of my neighbors had lived through. 2 figures stepped out. Reflective vests. Clipboards. One with a camera. They didn't say hello, they didn't even nod. The tall one walked straight to the pole, looked it up and down like he was judging a crime scene. The shorter one snapped photos, each click loud in the still morning. I didn't move. I just took a sip of my coffee and watched the steam mix with the mist. "Sir," the tall one finally said, pen tapping his clipboard, "this is a non-compliant installation. You'll receive a fine." I raised an eyebrow. "According to what code?" He didn't answer right away, just exchanged a look with the other man. The second one pretended to scroll on his tablet. "You can appeal after payment," the tall one said, already walking toward the SUV. I looked at the small red tag he'd slapped on the base of the pole. The ink was still wet, citation, stamped across the top in bold letters. I crouched down, touched the edge, cheap paper, printed off someone's home office. Not even laminated. "Do you have a warrant for inspection?" I asked quietly, but they were already halfway to the car. No response. Just the sound of their boots on gravel. I stood, pulled my phone from my pocket, and snapped a photo of their license plate. Then one of them. Then the other. They didn't like that. I saw the taller one stiffen a little as he opened the driver's door. "Just doing your job, huh?" I said. He turned halfway, squinting at me through those mirrored glasses. "We're maintaining community standards, sir." "Of course," I said, nodding. "I maintain things too." The SUV's door slammed. The engine hummed back to life. They didn't rush, but they didn't linger either. As the vehicle rolled away, the flag above me rippled once. Hard, catching the breeze like it knew it had been challenged. I took another sip of my coffee. Bitter now, cooling fast. Across the street, Mrs. Dalton was watering her roses, pretending not to look. 2 houses down, someone peeked through a curtain. That's how these things started. Quiet, subtle, with everyone pretending it was none of their business. I picked up the red tag again, flipped it over. Blank on the back. No signature, no ordinance number, just an HOA logo and a date. The arrogance of it all made me smile a little. They thought I'd argue. They thought I'd yell, maybe demand a supervisor, give them a show for their little report. But I'd spent enough years learning when to speak and when to write. I walked inside, set the tag on the counter next to the old binder I kept for property paperwork. The pages were filled with every letter, receipt, and inspection notice I'd ever received, neatly dated, scanned, and backed up. Experience had taught me something the HOA hadn't learned yet. People in power get sloppy when they think no one's watching. I jotted down the time, the plate number, the description of both men. Outside, the flag flapped again, steady, defiant, alive. I looked at it through the window, the morning light cutting through the fabric like stained glass. For a moment I thought about the places that flag had flown before, not here, not in a cul-de-sac, but on bases, in windstorms, over sand and concrete. Men had saluted it. Men had died under it. Now 2 clipboard warriors wanted it gone because it didn't match the color of someone's siding. I let out a long breath, set my mug down, and smiled. You picked the wrong pole today. By the second week, the mailbox had turned into a warning bell. Every morning, a new envelope waited. pale, official-looking, stamped with that same HOA logo like a brand pressed into paper. Inside each one, the tone sharpened. The first called it a courtesy notice. The second used the word violation. By the third, they stopped pretending to be polite. The fines had started small, $50. Then $100. Then, pending lien, appeared in bold, underlined twice, as if intimidation carried legal weight. That evening, I spread them all across the kitchen table. The sunset leaked through the blinds in long, orange bars, cutting across the paper like stripe. It almost looked ceremonial, a flag of bureaucracy. Each letter had a timestamp. Each one used the same wording. They weren't even bothering to change the template anymore. I dated them carefully, photographed each one, and slipped them into plastic sleeve. Outside, I could hear my neighbor's sprinklers ticking, voices drifting faintly between fences. They warned him. He should just take it down. Not worth losing your house over a flag. I didn't blame them. Most folks just wanted quiet lives. No fights. No meetings. No trouble. But I'd learned long ago that silence was the first thing you lose when you let others speak for you. I picked up the phone, dialed the county records office, and waded through the usual robotic menus. The woman who finally answered had that flat, end-of-shift tone, but when I asked for public filings of the HOA bylaws, her voice perked up. "They haven't updated those in a while," she said. "Last registered versions from 2009. Should I email you a copy?" "Please do," I said, pen scratching on a notepad. "And could you confirm the last amendment date?" A pause. Papers shuffled. Looks like they never filed the amendment packet for architectural revisions. Good to know. The call ended. I sat there a moment longer, listening to the clock tick and the hum of the fridge filling the quiet. They'd overstep. Not by accident, by habit. Power gets comfortable that way. Later, I stepped out onto the porch. The street was calm. Porch lights blinked on one by one, like a slow roll call. Across the road, Mrs. Dalton watered her flowers again, pretending not to see me. But her husband, sitting behind her in his recliner, gave a faint nod. Small gestures meant more than they looked. The HOA president's house sat 3 doors down. Big lawn, perfect hedges, the kind of home that looked like it auditioned for a magazine cover. His name was Nolan. He'd moved in 5 years ago and declared himself restorer of standards before he even learned everyone's names. He'd turned the HOA meetings into his own courtroom, rules, penalties, votes that always went his way. That night, his post showed up on the neighborhood website. "Rules keep our neighborhood beautiful," it said. "Exceptions weaken order." Underneath, the comments piled up, a mix of agreement, mockery, and the usual digital silence of people who didn't want to take side. I didn't respond. I never do. Online battles are for people who mistake noise for influence. Instead, I watched the reflection of the flag in the front window, still, even in the night breeze. I thought about the men I'd served with, the ones who'd never come home to argue about property code. The next morning, another letter came. This one was hand-delivered, slid right under the door. Final notice before enforcement action. They'd underlined that one too. Someone wanted me nervous. I wasn't. I placed it beside the others, added a note. Hand-delivered, no witness, no signature. Later that afternoon, I saw Nolan walking the street in his polo and clipboard, stopping at mailboxes, making conversation loud enough for others to hear. He thrived on the image, the responsible man keeping chaos out of his kingdom. When he glanced my way, I waved. Not mockingly. Just a slow, polite gesture. The kind that unsettles people who expect fear. He didn't wave back. That night, I turned off the lights, sat at the table again, and opened the drawer where I kept my old service files. Among the medals, folded papers, and faded certificates sat a manila folder, the one I'd nearly forgotten. I brushed the dust off the label. Federal Statutes, Veteran Memorial Display Act. I opened it, tracing the printed text with my finger. The words were clear, undeniable. They could find me, threaten me, smear me. But this wasn't just a personal stand anymore. It was federal law. Outside, the crickets had started up, filling the night with their steady rhythm. I leaned back in my chair, feeling that old quiet focus settle in. The kind I hadn't felt since deployment. The kind that comes before things turn. They wanted a battle over a flag. They were about to get one. Written in paper, sealed in proof, and carried out with the same patience I'd learned years ago. Wait, document, strike once. The garage smelled of oil and old metal, the kind of scent that carried memory in it. I flicked on the single bulb overhead, and its weak light fell over the workbench, half tools, half paper. The noise of the world outside faded, replaced by the steady hum of the small fan on the shelf. On the bench, I'd spread out everything. HOA letters, printed screenshots, county documents, and the freshly downloaded copy of the association's current bylaws. I'd highlighted sections in yellow and circled a date, 2009. That was the last time they'd been officially filed. No revisions, no amendments, nothing. 13 years of unregistered updates, all illegal, all unenforceable. The arrogance of it made me smile. They'd built their entire house of rules on sand. I leaned back in the chair and cracked my knuckles. You like paperwork? I muttered to myself. You'll get paperwork. The old printer groaned awake beside me, spitting out copies of the outdated regulation. Each sheet carried the proof I needed. No mention of flags, poles, or community appearance ordinances. Just lines about parking violations and lawn height. The sound of the paper feeding became rhythmic, almost steadying. Out there, they had their polished meetings and smug letters. In here, I had the truth, and a file system that didn't forget. By noon, another letter came. This one was thicker. Hand-delivered again. No postage, no signature, just slid under the door like a threat. I didn't open it right away. I finished my coffee first. Then I sat down and unfolded it slowly, like defusing something that might explode. The header screamed, "Final warning." The text below had grown bolder, meaner. Legal citations cherry-picked out of context. New words appeared: lien, property seizure, court referral. The HOA treasurer had signed it this time, or at least scribbled something that resembled a signature. I could almost hear his voice in the phrasing. I read the line twice. Noncompliance will result in lien and property seizure. That word stuck out, seizure. It was the kind of word you used when you wanted fear, not fairness. I chuckled quietly, shaking my head. You sure about that word, seizure? I said to the empty garage. They didn't know me. They didn't know how careful I could be. Every move I'd ever made in uniform had been documented, recorded, cross-checked. And now they'd given me a new kind of mission. I set the letter aside, scanned it, and filed it under Exhibit C. Then I opened my calendar, because bullies always announce their next step. Sure enough, tucked at the bottom of the page was a new notice. HOA Compliance Review Meeting, attendance requested. They wanted me there. They wanted to make an example of me. I clicked print, and as the paper slid out, I circled the date in red ink. No hesitation. No emotion. Just precision. Out of habit, I glanced around the garage. The shelves stacked with decades of tools, old parts, things too heavy with history to throw away. Every piece had a story. Every dent and stain meant something. In the far corner, under a layer of dust and a thick tarp, sat one more story they didn't know about. I walked over slowly, brushing my hand along the edge of the workbench as I passed. My fingertips caught the edge of the tarp, and a small cloud of dust lifted into the light. The fabric felt rough, familiar. I pulled it back halfway, and the shape underneath came into focus. Cold, steel, unmistakable. Not a toy. Not a prop. Something that belonged to another life. A life where rules were real and lines meant something. The dull metal gleamed faintly in the dim light. The insignia, still stenciled on the side, peeked through the dust. I stood there for a long moment, staring at it, the hum of the fan the only sound in the room. They thought they were dealing with some stubborn old homeowner. Someone who'd eventually bow to pressure, who'd fold to threats and fake legalese. But they'd picked a man who'd spent half his life fixing machines designed for war, machines that didn't quit just because someone told them to. The quiet felt different now. Not heavy. Not fearful. Just waiting. I pulled the tarp all the way off. Beneath it, the full outline of military armor rested, silent, solid, and ready. I exhaled, slow and even. "All right," I said softly. "Let's remind them what follow-through looks like." By the time the sun began to slide behind the rooftops, the neighborhood had changed. You could feel it, that strange electricity before something breaks. Curtains moved more than usual, conversations cut short when I walked by. Everyone knew about the meeting now. Word travels fast when the HOA smells blood. The invitation had said attendance requested, but Nolan, the president, had gone further. He'd posted in the community forum that I'd finally agreed to face accountability. A neat little headline for his power fantasy. Someone must have told him I planned to show up, and that I wasn't coming quietly. I could hear him 2 houses down, voice booming over the trimmed hedges. He stood with his vice president and a few hangers-on, laughing too loud. "We're going to teach him a lesson," he said. "This isn't the army. He doesn't get to make his own rules." The others nodded, the kind of people who mistook compliance for order. They carried their clipboards like shields. I didn't bother responding. I'd learned long ago. Men like Nolan only understood silence when it arrived at the right volume. Back at my driveway, the air felt heavy, humid, still, charged. I sat on the porch steps, coffee cooling beside me, watching the street. The cicadas had started their long mechanical hum, blending with the faint rattle of distant traffic. Then, from far off, I heard it, a different sound entirely. Low, steady, mechanical. Tires crunching gravel. A tan pickup turned the corner. In the bed sat 2 men I hadn't seen in a decade, faces older, smiles the same. The truck rolled to a stop in front of my house, engine idling. The passenger leaned out. "You sure they know what's on that trailer, Jack?" I smiled. "They'll see soon enough." The driver, old Sergeant Hall, gave a small nod, his eyes glinting with the kind of mischief that hadn't aged a day. They unhitched the trailer quietly, parking it in the far corner of the yard. It was covered tight under a black tarp, the same one I'd brushed off days ago in the garage. We didn't talk about what was under it. We didn't have to. Instead, we just sat there for a while, 3 men who'd seen worse storms, listening to the soft ticking of a cooling engine. Across the street, curtains shifted again. I saw Mrs. Dalton's hand freeze midair, watering can suspended. "Whole place smells like fear," Hall muttered. "Yeah," I said. "Smells like they're starting to realize what fairness feels like." He chuckled low, shook his head. "Same tone you had back in Kandahar. Right before things got loud." "Hope it doesn't have to," I said. But part of me knew. Some lessons only stick when they echo. By the time they left, the sky had gone copper. The street lamps blinked on, one by one, casting long shadows across perfect lawns. Down the block, the HOA board was busy setting up for their spectacle. Folding chairs. A long plastic table with microphones and a banner that read Annual Compliance Review. They even had a tripod-mounted camera, "for the record," they'd say later. From my porch, it almost looked like a play. Actors rehearsing their lines before the curtain went up. Nolan stood front and center, gesturing like a preacher. "Let's make an example of him," I heard the VP say. They didn't see me watching. Didn't see the trailer sitting quietly in my yard, tarp outlined in gold from the fading sun. The stillness deepened as twilight fell. You could taste the anticipation, that brittle pause right before a storm breaks open the air. Every sound was too clear. A single car door closing, a gate creaking, the flag on my pole snapping once in the wind. I gathered my papers into a slim binder, slid the latest notice inside the cover, and locked the door behind me. When I reached the edge of the porch, I paused. The street stretched before me, calm, too calm. Then, from down the driveway, came that same low rumble as the truck backed up once more. The trailer rolled into view, slow and deliberate. The tarp shifted in the breeze, catching the last shards of sunset. Underneath, the faint glint of steel shone through, curved, unmistakable. The sound turned every head on the block. Conversations stopped. Even Nolan, mid-sentence, froze and looked toward the source of the noise. The rumble deepened, echoing between the quiet houses. And for the first time since this started, the power shifted, not in words, not in rules, but in the silence that followed, when everyone suddenly remembered what respect used to sound like. The HOA meeting drew a crowd big enough to fill the community center. Rows of folding chairs creaked under the weight of neighbors who didn't want to miss the show. Phones were already out, screens glowing, recording from every angle. Some came for gossip, others for spectacle. Only a few came to see what justice might look like when it wore work boots instead of a suit. I took a seat near the center, my folder on my lap. No lawyer, no audience of my own. Just me, the paperwork, and a kind of quiet I'd learned to wear like armor. Nolan, the HOA president, stood at the head of the long plastic table, his posture straight as a flagpole. He smiled that politician's smile, the one that says, "This is my house, and you're lucky to be invited in." "Let's call this session to order," he announced, tapping his pen against the clipboard. His voice carried easily over the low hum of whispers. "We're here to address a case of defacement of the community's uniform appearance. Mr. Mills has installed an unauthorized structure in violation of Section." He glanced at his papers, pretending to read. "Of Section 12.6. I opened my folder. "Section 12.6? I said. "Would that be the version filed with the county, or the one you never registered after 2009? A few heads turned. Someone in the back coughed. Nolan blinked. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something fast, but he waved her off. "We don't need to debate filing details," he said. "The rule exists regardless." "That's the problem," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The rule doesn't exist. You've been enforcing a draft for 13 years. The last valid bylaw doesn't mention flagpoles. At all." He gave a short laugh, brittle around the edges. "You can't intimidate this board, Mr. Mills." I looked up, met his eyes, and said, "Intimidation's your department. Mine's maintenance." That line drew a few chuckles from the back. Someone whispered, "He's got him." Nolan's jaw tightened. He tried to recover, standing a little taller. "Regardless, your display violates the aesthetic standards of this neighborhood." I slid a printed page from my folder and placed it on the table in front of him. Federal Statute 4 U.S. Code Section 8, the Veteran Memorial Display Act. It overrides HOA regulations that restrict the display of the American flag on private property. You'd know that if you read the law you're pretending to enforce. The room went still. The HOA lawyer's pen froze halfway across her pad. Nolan's face turned a shade darker. "We'll review this later. For now, we're fining you an additional—" I interrupted, voice calm. "You might want to pause that thought." He frowned. "And why's that?" "Because before you fine me again," I said, standing, "you should probably look outside." Every head turned toward the glass doors. At first, there was only the reflection of the fluorescent lights, a warped shimmer. Then came the sound. A deep, steady rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Someone stood, pressing their phone to the glass. Another followed. Then a gasp. Outside, illuminated by the setting sun, sat a full-sized, decommissioned military tank. Its surface caught the orange light like burnished bronze. And from the turret, snapping proudly in the wind, the same flag they'd tried to bury under citations and threats. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a whisper rolled through the crowd, "He brought a tank." Phones lifted, shutters clicked, the flash of camera lights reflecting off the metal outside. Nolan turned toward the lawyer, but she was already packing her folder, her face pale as printer paper. I stayed quiet, hands in my pockets. "You see," I said finally, You can't threaten a man who already learned to build things stronger than your rules. The rumble outside faded into silence. The only sound left was the soft flutter of the flag through the open door, steady, calm, and louder than any speech I could have made. Nolan didn't say another word. Not to me. Not to anyone. And as the crowd slowly rose, half in disbelief, half in quiet applause, I turned and walked out into the last light of the day, the flag above me still catching the wind, unbent, unbroken. The parking lot lights buzzed to life, flooding the pavement in cold white. By then, half the neighborhood had gathered, phones out, lenses pointed, whispers chasing through the air like static. The tank sat motionless in the glow, metal catching the light, flag waving slow and deliberate from its turret. The HOA board stood a few yards away, trying to look in control and failing miserably. Then the sirens came. 2 sheriff's SUVs rolled up, lights flashing blue against the community center walls. The crowd parted in silence as the deputies stepped out, hands resting lightly near their holsters, alert but not alarmed. The HOA president, Nolan, jumped at the chance. "There," he shouted, pointing toward me. "That man's brought a military vehicle into a residential zone. It's a threat display. We demand immediate removal." The deputies exchanged a look. The older one, the sheriff, from the way he carried himself, approached slowly, squinting at the tank, then at me. When his eyes focused, recognition softened his face. "Sergeant Mills," he said. "Well, I'll be damned. Haven't seen you since the parade in Fayette." I nodded. "Evening, Sheriff. Didn't expect to see you this side of the county." He chuckled once, still eyeing the machine behind me. "You're the museum curator now, right? Heard you got that old M60 restored for display." "Demilitarized, registered, insured," I said. "No rounds, no engine modifications. Perfectly legal. Brought it in for tomorrow's veterans event. Just parked it early." A murmur swept through the crowd. A few people lowered their phones. Others whispered to one another, uncertain whether to keep filming or start apologizing. Nolan stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. "Sheriff, he's lying. That thing, it's clearly meant to intimidate us." The sheriff turned his head, expression unreadable. "Intimidate you? You called us out here for a tank on private property? It's parked illegally." Nolan stammered. "We have bylaws against this sort of." "Funny you mention bylaws," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Because the last filed version doesn't cover veteran memorials or display vehicles. You've been enforcing rules that don't exist." The sheriff's eyes shifted between us, weighing every word. Then he sighed and looked back at his deputies. "You boys check the registration on that thing. Run it through the system." One deputy nodded, tapping away on his tablet. The crowd leaned in closer. The HOA board huddled near their table, whispering frantically. Someone dropped a clipboard. A minute later, the deputy looked up. "Registered to the Fayette Military Museum. Decommissioned. VIN matches." The sheriff nodded once, then faced Nolan. His tone changed, slow, firm, the kind of voice that fills a room without needing volume. "Mr. Nolan," he said, "you just filed a false report on a veteran's lawful property. You wasted county resources for your own grievance." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Phones lifted again, but this time they pointed at Nolan. He tried to speak, words stumbling. "We were acting in good faith." "Good faith ends," the sheriff interrupted, "where the law begins. You don't get to weaponize authority just because you run a neighborhood." The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Then someone near the back muttered, just loud enough to carry, "Guess he can park that there." Laughter broke out, small at first, then spreading, nervous and sharp. Nolan's face went crimson. His hands trembled as he fumbled with his phone, probably trying to call someone higher up, the HOA lawyer, maybe the county clerk. His voice cracked. "This is outrageous. We'll sue." "Be my guest," the sheriff said, sliding his hat back on. "But before you do, you might want to explain your misuse of HOA funds." Because this call gives us probable cause to audit your association. That one landed like a hammer. Even the crowd went quiet again. I couldn't help it, I smiled, just slightly. Appreciate the assist, Sheriff. He returned the look, faintly amused. Always glad to serve, Sergeant. Looks like you handled the heavy lifting. The deputies packed up, the lights dimmed, and one by one the neighbors drifted back home, their voices low but changed, no longer whispering fear, but something closer to respect. Nolan stayed behind, hunched over his phone, muttering into it like a man watching his empire crack. The night air felt cooler now. The flag above the tank snapped once in the breeze, sharp and clean. Then Nolan's phone buzzed again. He froze mid-sentence. I could hear the words faintly through the still air, a county official's voice on speaker. Mr. Nolan, this is compliance. We've received a request to review your HOA financial record. You'll need to provide all statements by morning. His face went pale. I turned away, heading back toward my truck. Behind me, the sheriff called out, "See you at the parade tomorrow, Jack." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. And as I passed the tank, its shadow stretched across the asphalt like a monument, proof that sometimes, the only thing stronger than power is patience. Morning came soft and clean, the kind of morning that made the whole neighborhood look like it had been forgiven overnight. The air smelled of wet cedar and distant coffee. Sunlight poured over the porch railing, catching the brass finial at the top of my flagpole until it gleamed like fire. The flag moved slow in the wind, steady, unbothered, free. For the first time in weeks, no white SUVs prowled the street. No clipboards. No letters taped to my door. The HOA banner that used to hang over the community center had been taken down sometime before dawn. Word was, the board had resigned overnight, every last one of them. The county had come knocking right after the sheriff's visit. Turns out, Nolan and his treasurer had been cooking the books, inflating dues, billing ghost contractors, moving funds through maintenance accounts that didn't exist. The same paperwork they'd tried to use against me ended up being their own undoing. Poetic, really. Bureaucrats always underestimate how sharp paperwork can cut when you know how to handle it. The newspaper hit the driveway just after 7. The headline took up half the front page: Veterans Tank Ends HOA Abuse. Below it, a grainy photo of the parking lot, my flag flying proud above the turret, floodlights blazing behind it. I read it once, folded it neatly, and set it aside. The neighborhood woke slow. One by one, doors opened, people stepping out with hesitant smiles, like they weren't sure if it was okay to look me in the eye yet. Mrs. Dalton crossed the street first, holding 2 cups of coffee. Her hands trembled just enough that I pretended not to notice. "I figured you could use a refill," she said. I took the cup and nodded. "Appreciate it." She hesitated. "We didn't know how bad they'd gotten. We should have said something." I smiled a little. "You did. Just not out loud." She nodded, eyes dropping to the flag. "They're saying the HOA's finished. County froze the accounts." "Good," I said. "Means we get to live like neighbors again." Across the street, more people came out, the same folks who once whispered behind curtains. One man lifted a hand in a quiet salute. A kid on a bike stopped to stare at the tank still parked in my yard and whispered, "Cool." For the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. I finished my coffee, set the cup on the railing, and got back to the small job I'd left unfinished, fixing the neighbor's broken mailbox. The hinge had rusted through weeks ago, but I'd been too busy fighting a different kind of corrosion. The kind that creeps through rules and power instead of metal. As I tightened the last screw, a voice came through my phone speaker. "The sheriff." "Mills," he said, his tone relaxed now. "County wanted me to pass along their thanks. And unofficially, that was one hell of a move last night." I chuckled. "Appreciate it, Sheriff. Didn't plan for all that attention." "Guess that's what happens when you bring armor to a paperwork fight," he said, laughing. "You take care, Sergeant." "Always do." The call ended. The breeze lifted again, tugging gently at the flag. The sound of it, that crisp, rhythmic flutter, was better than any apology. I leaned against the porch post for a while, just watching. The tank would be hauled back to the museum later that week, but for now it sat where it belonged, not as a threat but as a reminder. Mrs. Dalton waved once more before heading back inside. A few more neighbors followed. Normalcy was creeping back in, one kind gesture at a time. Then, just as the street settled into silence, the mail truck stopped in front of my house. The driver gave a short nod and slid a single envelope into my box. No HOA logo this time. No threats. Just a new seal, crisp, clean, official-looking. I walked over, pulled it free, and read the label. State Zoning Authority. Notice of Review. I let out a quiet laugh, low and tired but amused. Round 2, huh? The wind caught the flag again, snapping it high against the blue sky. I smiled, tucked the letter under my arm, and went back to tightening the last bolt on the mailbox. Steady hands, steady heart, already ready for whatever came next.